And a happy Saturday afternoon to all. Today we are here at another very important crossroad for our community and for Guyana. Today we have a very learned guest, a man with a long track record of being able to have his concerns being addressed at the national level, and that is someone by the name of Christopher Ram. And he will be coordinated by Sais Narayan. And we also have the Minister of Security, the Honorable Khemraj Ramjattan. So today I have here a live audience here with us in Richmond Hill, and it's a good opportunity for all of us to take back and listen to these learned gentlemen giving us their view of where Guyana is looming with this constitutional impact and what is happening. Now we will be going to our video, and again I thank you again for you to stay tuned with what we have presenting today.
Article 106.6, which states the cabinet, including the president, shall resign if the government is defeated by the votes of the majority of all elective members of the National Assembly on a vote of confidence. Article 106.7 states, notwithstanding its defeat, the government shall remain in office and shall hold an election within 3 months, or such longer period as the National Assembly shall by resolution, supported by not less than 2/3 of the votes of all elective members of the National Assembly determine, and shall resign after the President takes the oath of office following the election.
I would just say that
the government is illegitimate after March 21.
Yeah.
The President can no longer be referred to as the President. He's not the head of state. This is what 197A says. And this is one of those amendments that came out of the Harmonization process.
Yeah.
This was driven by the APNU, or the PNC as it then was.
Yeah.
And some people say, and it then is.
Yeah.
Now it says the role of the state's defense and security shall be to defend and preserve the country's sovereignty and integrity and guarantee the normal functioning of institutions and the security of against. That's what it is.
Yeah.
They have a duty, because a constitution is based on the rule of law.
Yeah.
It's based on a standard of civilization. You can't have one man saying, I am staying.
Yeah.
What if the ministers were to say, and the other people say, look, we go in.
But a big issue of the day, of course, is the fact that on the 21st of December, we had the Charan Das issue, in which he became, quite frankly, a Judas. I'm very frank about it. And then, after we eat the food, and then Jack Dale, and I think Moses Nagamutu finished the thing, that man gone and said, yes, yes, yes. And Jack Dale was the one that largely knew about this whole arrangement. That is why he could have brought a no confidence motion, knowing that he got in the bag. And that is why he was so confident, although we're saying that, look, we know that the entire 33 lot there said that they're not going to vote for the no confidence motion. And that fella went and voted for it. That is the kind of politics that does bring on a lot of nonsense in a country, when people could be bought like that. And now when they are bought, all of a sudden, he wants elections in 90 days. Well, we have gotten our legal team to argue the point that because of a special nature of a no confidence motion, it could mean that it is 34 and not 35. We lost the first round in the High Court on that score, but we got 2 more rounds to go. So, okay, we get Roxanne George and we respect her. She's a very good quality judge. She said, no, the 33 is the threshold. Well, we can go to the Court of Appeal. And if we lose the Court of Appeal, then we can go to the CCJ. And then we're going to know if it is 33 or 34. Elections are going to be very closely fought in Guyana. And you might very well get that. And we don't want a scenario where we don't know what the threshold figure is, whether it's 33 or 34.
Good day all and welcome. Happy 49th Republic anniversary to the people of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana. This is why we're here today. We're here to talk about the Cooperative Republic of Guyana and more particularly its constitution and events and issues that happened in the Cooperative Republic since December 23rd, 2018. I'm your host, Sesnarayan Singh, and with us today is Mr. Christopher Ram, accountant, lawyer, university lecturer, and social commentator. And also joining us from Georgetown, Guyana, by way of the internet link-up, is Mr. Khemraj Ramjattan, lawyer, politician, longtime member of parliament. He has been there for 26 and a half years to be exact. Am I correct there, Khemraj?
Yeah, I think you're correct there.
Yes. My take. Article 1066 and 1067 of the Constitution states, respectively, the Cabinet, including the President, shall resign if the government is defeated by the vote of a majority of all the elected members of the National Assembly on a vote of confidence. And notwithstanding its defeat, the government shall remain in office and shall hold an elections within 3 months or such longer period as the National Assembly shall by resolution, supported by not less than 2/3 of the votes of all the elected members of the National Assembly, determine and shall resign after the President takes the oath of office following the elections. Today marks 63 days since the government of Guyana was defeated in a vote of confidence in the National Assembly. This vote is duly carried and accepted by the Speaker. When called upon in January 2019 to reverse his decision, the Speaker made it very clear that, and I quote the Speaker, "On this occasion, and without further ado, I decline the invitation to act in the reversal." Some persons saw it fit to disregard the Speaker's decision and on this matter, and saw it fit to take the matter to court. A court of competent jurisdiction to basically review the decision of the Speaker. I was completely advised that no court can reverse the Speaker's decision. It can only provide guidance to the National Assembly for the future. But we will discuss that today. Those court proceedings were launched and the Chief Justice acting issued a landmark decision on January 31st, 2019, highlighting several key issues. One, in accordance with Article 155 of the Constitution, no person who holds allegiance or obedience to a foreign power is qualified to be a member of the National Assembly. Two, she also found that the motion was duly and legitimately carried, and the required majority, which were 33 elected members of the National Assembly, is recognized. Three, the request to stop the clock and stay the Speaker's ruling was denied, which means that the 90-day clock still continues ticking, and it will expire on March 20th, 2019, unless 2/3 of the National Assembly extended. The Cabinet, including the President, shall resign, this is what she also found, upon the passage of the motion, which in law means must, shall means must in. But the government shall continue to function until the 90 days are up, or is extended by a vote of 2/3 of the members of the National Assembly. Lastly, government shall hold an election within 3 months. This can be extended if 2/3 of the National Assembly sits and decides to extend that timetable. So here we are. Let's begin. Questions from both of you gentlemen. And I'll start off with Mr. Ramjattan, who I know for a long time. What is the near-term outlook, Mr. Ramjattan, if the National Assembly does not extend that 90 days?
Well, then you'll certainly have what is regarded internationally as a constitutional crisis. And I must admit, for the purposes of this dialogue and engagement, that we are going to presume that the 90 days has passed and we still do not have the 2/3 majority in Parliament. We are going to enter some uncharted waters. However, we also know that the conditionalities in relation to our approach to the issue, namely that we access the court to get the meaning of what really is a majority of all the members of the National Assembly, and also whether a dual citizen's vote can be invalidated in the context of the Reed litigation. And I think we should await the developments with that in relation to the Court of Appeal ruling and also the CCJ's ruling. Look, I want to make mention of this, that is what happens all over the world. Even when you had Al Gore having some problems with the Florida Chads, it went straight up to the Supreme Court. I understand there are some other state elections where there were certain problems, and they went right up to the Supreme Court. Yes, you mentioned very extensively what the High Court judge ruled. But similarly, that same High Court judge, or I think it was another judge, ruled that Barrett could have run a third term. The Court of Appeal ruled that Barrett could have run a third term. And then the CCJ changed that and said he can't run a third term. So there is finality of the matter going right up to the CCJ. The other limb is that you would have to have an elections commission that is ready to conduct elections in the 90-day period. And from all the history that I know of, and from the statements made long time ago by Mr. Steve Surjbali, there is no way that you could have done that. And especially, you can say we are taking advantage of this, but especially in the context of a 2018 arrangement whereby we indicated that the house-to-house registration will be done this year, and we allocated, I think, $3 billion for that purpose. So it is important to understand then that notwithstanding the looming crisis, as you would put it, it is indeed a rights that a political party and a government of the day can utilize by accessing the courts and also utilizing the readiness of the GCOM on the issue. GCOM is a constitutional body just like a High Court judge, and it has the role to conduct the elections. And if they indicate that they will not be ready in the 90 days, then we will have a crisis that could only be solved by, of course, the two parties, the major parties coming together, engaging, talking it through, and then having an elections that will be earlier than normal. However, if the Court of Appeal rule in our favor, say that a dual citizen's vote is invalidated and bring it down to 32, or it is impressed with the argument that we are making that it should be 34, then what happens? It means necessarily that normalcy will be restored, and of course the PPP will then say, well, they want to go to the CCJ because the Court of Appeal is wrong. And of course we're going to ask them to go right there because we would like to see finality in it.
Mr. Ram, your take?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've listened very carefully to Mr. Ramjattan, with whom I've had a long association. In fact, pointedly, that association includes not only the formation of his party, but significantly the question of the no confidence motion which he brought in 2014. He will probably not want to admit that I helped in the framing of the wording of that no confidence motion. He's aware too that we had discussions on the majority of 33, and at that time he had expressed fears about the APNU AFC supporting them, and this is why he did not push. I think you will recall that, Mr. Ramjattan. You will recall that you did not push the no confidence motion as much as you might have wanted to do. During that time, Nigel Hughes, the man who is now saying that 34 is the majority, had accepted that 33 is the majority. I am glad Mr. Ramjattan did not repeat his word about calling Charandas Prasad a Judas. I didn't think such language has any place with the vice president of the country. Some of the statements he made are clearly incorrect. We have a written constitution to quote Al Gore, shows an unawareness of the American system. They had a period of counting. This is not what we're into now. So the analogy is wrong, it is false, and it is dangerously misleading. I also want to say, and I'm glad, I really welcome Mr. Ramjattan participating in this program. I should say as well that I have this television program in Guyana, and Mr. Ramjattan is one of the few APNUFC ministers who appeared in the program, and he tells me that he had encouraged his other colleagues to participate in the program. They have not done so. Finally, in my closing remarks, I also want to say, I want to make 2 points. That our Constitution is based on democracy and the rule of law. The Constitution is our supreme document. Democracy underpins everything we do. Mr. Ramjattan is a senior lawyer with whom I've worked in the past. When the action was brought by Freddie Kissoon, I was on Mr. Ramjattan's team against the PPP and Mr. Jaglio, that libel case. You recall that, Khemraj. So, and Khemraj, as a senior lawyer, knows that there is no stay on a declaration. And even if it was not a declaration, an order, Mr. Moderator, there's only a stay if the court rules there is a stay. Mr. Ramjattan knows that all of this, and he talks about GCOM, it is big collusion. GCOM is a creature of the Constitution. It has to take note, and all we're hearing one day, they don't have money, they can't get money. Mr. Ramjattan knows about the contingencies fund. If they want money today, my point is this, and Mr. Ramjattan and Mr. Globespan are very good friends. I know that. Mr. Globespan has said, and this is a constitutional body, they manage their own budget. They could have taken that money to do the elections. In any case, even if they couldn't do that, Mr. Singh, there is the contingencies fund. And you don't need to go to the parliament to get to the contingencies fund. What we have here, it's a government that has lost a motion of no confidence. It accepted it on the night. The president, Mr. Ramjattan's party member, Mr. Nagamutu, accepted the decision. And then suddenly Mr. Nigel Hughes came with this, oh, you need 34, and then it was the bandwagon. We know that all of that is contrived. So to get to this question, will we have a crisis? I think we already have a crisis. We have a crisis because a major player in our society that happens to be in the government is now saying, you know what, we are not going to play by the democratic rules of this Constitution, and we will decide how to interpret it as and when we want, and if it doesn't please us, we will break it, and who does what they can do what they want. That's the attitude we're having. And I think, no, let me finish this, please. And I think it's doesn't augur well, and we're going to get into this, examples around the world. Mr. Ramjattan raised issues. Well, you know, we don't have a precedent where a government has lost the no confidence motion and which is to say, you move me if you think you can. Because that's where we are.
Before we go further, Mr. Ram, I just wanted to zero in on that question because the question was basically futuristic. I wanted to know what happens, the near-term outlook after March 20th. And I think Mr. Ramjattan did point out what are the options available to his government. And can you, from your perspective, tell us what are your thoughts on the near-term outlook for the country and the government?
Well, Mr. Ramjattan is in a better position to say that because Mr. Ramjattan knows what happens depends on how the government, the APNU plus the AFC, were to respond to this situation. If they were to call in today, and I was on a radio program and I implored President Granger, look, let's do what is right for Guyana. With elections, we have winners and losers. With democracy, everybody wins. And so I don't think there is any other person, any other group that determines what happens now, what happens tomorrow, because we're into 65 of 90 days. There's no indication that President Granger intends to have elections. Mr. Ramjattan is saying, we're going to wait until CCJ. When?
Okay, so
no, the Constitution is an imperative.
Let me take that line of thought that you have and seek both of your reactions to it. There is an article in the Constitution called Article 95, which is specifically vacancy in the office of the president. Can both of you gentlemen help explain to the common man, because these programs are all about educating the common man. Can you help us understand the role of the Chancellor of the Judiciary in Article 95? Anyone acting on that role, if 2/3 of the National Assembly does not extend that 90 days clock.
I don't know if Khemraj, you want to go
Mr.
first?
Ramas, you want
I would let Khemraj go first.
Mr. Ramjattan react. Mr. Ram, you first, then Mr. Ramjattan.
Okay. Now, as you correctly say, what Article 95 is, it's the order of precedence under the Guyana Constitution. And you have the same kind of thing here. You have the president, the vice president, then the leader of the Congress, which would be Ms. Pelosi. Now, what we have here is it sets the precedent. If there's a president, the president obviously holds the office. If the president cannot, for whatever reason, hold the office, it goes to the prime minister. If the prime minister cannot do it, then it goes to a person, an elected member of the National Assembly, appointed by the cabinet. If none of those applies, then it goes to the chancellor. That's the sequence. But it's a little bit more complex than that, Mr. Sears. We have also, so you have that's how the sequence is supposed to work. Now, my view is that there's a technical and a de facto vacancy in the office of the presidency come March 21, because he has up to 90 days. What you have here is a violation of the Constitution. But I will, and Mr. Ramjattan can guide me if he thinks I'm wrong. You do have Article 92. You also have Article 178. These things deal with the tenure of the president. I would be one of the first to admit, to say that when the drafters, now 92 deals with this. 92 speaks of the tenure of the president, and 180 talks about the tenure of the president as well, office of the president. Interestingly enough, 92 does not mention 106. And that's because the 106.6 and 106.7 are amendments brought about by the Herdman-Stoney Accord, whereas 92, 179 and 180 are the original 1980, what people like to call the Burnham Constitution. So it is absolutely correct that 92, 179, or 180 does not specifically refer to 85. But let us look at, because constitutional law is about interpretation. If there is not clear words, it's about timing of when conflicting provisions in a constitution. Can a constitution tolerate a situation where it allows a person to remain as the president if that person openly, publicly, and in defiance of an order of an interpretation by the court? I'm not saying order. In defiance of an interpretation of the court.
You're saying that.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Ramjattan. In defiance of the Constitution, says, I don't give a damn what the Constitution says. I am staying here. You know what you have, Mr. Moderator? You have a squatter. You have a usurper. How can a president, how can a person, let us say it wasn't a serving president. Let us say someone else had taken that position. Would the Constitution have said, oh, Article 92, Article 179 and 180 does not so provide? Of course
yes,
not.
Mr. Ram. So let's give Mr. Ramjattan a chance to
By all
respond to
means,
your
by all
your
means.
proposal.
I am very happy to hear Christopher Ram indicating that the Constitution on these matters depend on the interpretations and the constructions that have to be put on them, especially when you have somewhat articulated in irreconcilable fashion, let's say the 1066 and the 1067. But you know, we are here more or less to talk on general issues and not to be as if we are in a court of law. I want to say this, that it is going to be extraordinarily difficult for any chancellor in these circumstances to become the president of the day. It is laughable. I think it is totally ludicrous and ridiculous. The de facto doctrine, the doctrine that was done by our great Jeff Haynes in the Mitchell case, states, and by the way, by Claudette Singh in the Esther Pereira case, states in the Esther Pereira case, many illegalities and irregularities happened in the 1997 elections, I think it was, in which she then asked, and I was the lawyer that presented the argument of the doctrine of necessity. Who then stays on now that an elections was held invalid and totally in violation of all the laws of Guyana? She said the doctrine of necessity, which is a version of the de facto doctrine, is that the existing government stays until such time as the next elections is held. So you don't have a chancellor. I don't understand why we're going into Article 85. 85 gives the hierarchy.
It's not 85, it's
status
95, sir.
society.
It's 95,
So-
Mr. Ramjattan. It's 95, not 85.
85, sorry. I don't have the constitution here, but whatever you are quoting from in relation to the hierarchy does not apply. And in any event, the de facto doctrine will allow this government to stay until the next elections. And we, in that elections of 1997,
If the next elections is 10 years from now, what
it
happens?
cannot be. Elections must be held every 5 years or such earlier time. So it is not that we are going to have elections in 10 years. We are not like the PDP that didn't have local government elections for 20 years. It's 20 years they didn't have any local government elections. And they're supposed to have it every 3 years. So
Okay,
understand that.
So
I
we
will
have
allow
in
the place-
this audience. I want to
I'd like
switch
to
to them, but
respond-
not as yet. I'm just giving
I'd
this
like to
cue to
respond to that,
Vishnu
though.
to
I'd like
line
to
up his
respond.
question.
I'd like to
So-
respond to that thing about the PPP. Mr. Ramjattan
Okay.
was part of the PPP in those days. We were, and
That's
hypocrisy.
correct.
He and Moses Nagamoto. He's being very extremely hypocritical. Now we're talking about
It
the
is
doctrine.
not hypocritical,
We're talking,
Christopher Ram.
we're talking about the doctrine of
We all
necessity.
agreed a
No,
voter
I'm not
ID
going to let
card
you. I'm not going
will
to let
be
you
the
speak over me,
basis of
please.
voting.
I'm not going to let you speak over me, please, Mr. Ramjattan. Now,
But
the
you must
doctrine
not
of
be
necessity.
flawed
the
in rebuttal.
Mr.
me.
Ramjattan,
All right,
he's-
guys. We need to make sure that we move along. There are many folks in Richmond Hill who
I want
took
to
the
deal
time
with this
out from
question
their
of the
votes
doctrine of necessity, though.
to-
The
to-
doctrine of the
to come-
necessity cannot be self-induced. You refuse to honor the Constitution and then say, I am staying here, I'm the schoolyard bully, and nobody can move me.
You made
So the
that point,
doctrine of
Mr. Ram.
necessity
So
must apply.
let's move to, there are many folks who came to the studio to be in part of this in-house meeting, this town hall meeting in New York. Please be ready with your questions. I'm putting you on cue. I'm appealing to you to please be on point. We do not have time on our side, as you can see. Only 2 questions and already 23 minutes are gone. So the last question before the town hall audience for both parties. I want to speak directly to Mr. Carl Greenwich, who sometimes acts as the Prime Minister. Mr. Greenwich has declared publicly that he's a dual citizen. We all know he's playing a major role on some gigantic issues, like, for example, the Venezuela border issue. Now, say suppose after March 20th, the authorities in Venezuela say that we do not recognize that man. He is not a bona fide key personnel of the government or the people of Guyana. What are the international implications, political implications, and security implications for the nation? Mr. Ramjattan first.
The
And then,
doctrine of necessity and the de facto doctrine applies, clearly. And if you want, you can say that Venezuela got its own issues too. Your president of America is recognizing
Guaido as against a Maduro. So it will all come back to what is de facto and de jure. And I don't want to, the company there, or the listeners on what you call this, the internet, to get the impression that we are getting very technical. But everybody in the world recognizes the coalition government as still the government of Guyana. And we got
March 20th.
Exactly. Well, that is what I'm saying. Even after that, when then we will have to go back to Parliament to fix a date. Let's say we lose all the cases right up to the CCJ, and the GCOM says that they are ready. Well, then we'll have to go and get what is called the two-thirds majority for a date to be fixed. And this concept of saying that the president is not legitimate and is a squatter, I think is very disrespectful. But that is the view of Christopher Ram. And of course, we in Guyana are Democrats. He could say whatever he wants, and we are going to die ensuring that he says what he wants. The trouble is that that president is duly elected and has not resigned. And even if you want to use 106.6 to argue that he is resigned, the fact is that there's a proviso to 106 called 106.7 that says, notwithstanding that, he shall remain in president and the government shall remain in government and shall then resign until the next election.
It says remain in office for 90 days.
No. Yes, right. Remain in office for 90 days. Well, the 90 days has not been done. And we're still before the court. As I've indicated to you, yes, we are going to enter some uncharted waters if the 90 days is done and we lose, let's say, the Court of Appeal case by that time.
Okay. Mr. Ram, the crowd is you. Any remarks?
Of course. Look, Mr. Ramjattan can't have his cake or his roti and eat it. You cannot say
you make me hungry now.
You cannot say Charan Das's vote is illicit, but Greenwich's vote is legitimate. You cannot set de jure and de facto. Ramjattan is saying he doesn't want to get into law and then use all these Latin words to fool people. That's not what it is. Now, the question is, the Venezuela, we know who we're dealing with, and I'm hoping that at least on issues like these, I noticed Mr. Ramjattan said he would die for my freedom. It might be tested soon, not to worry. But the Venezuelans may very well use that. What are we going to say? The de facto ruling of the APNU AFC government in Guyana, led by the Attorney General, Mr. Basil Williams? Is that the argument we're going to make? You just cannot do it. It is almost, Mr. Ramjattan talks about ludicrous. And it's people like Ramjattan and Nagamutu, the enablers of this lawlessness, because Mr. Granger was quite prepared at one stage to accept the consequences. In fact, even Nagamutu was prepared to accept the consequences. Suddenly, Nigel Hughes and the 34 majority changes it all. Greenwich will have the same problem. And look, let me say this. I have a complaint against the Commissioner of Police, calling on him to investigate those persons for making false oath under the legislation that carries a year imprisonment as penalty. When I get back to Ghana, I'm going to do this. In 7 days' time, I am going to remind the Commissioner of Police. And if he doesn't, I will either bring private criminal charge. Mr. Ramjattan had helped me with bringing private criminal charge against Jack Dio. Or I am going to bring an action against the Commissioner of Police to force him to do his work. But what we have here, we have a whole set of collusion. Now, I feel sorry for the position Mr. Ramjattan is put in. I will die for his freedom too. But
Thank you very much.
He knows how weak this thing is. He knows when he brought his no confidence motion, it was 33. What happened? It changed. Basil Williams changed it for him. Has Basil Williams re-educated Khemraj Ramjattan? I don't think he has. I honestly feel a bit saddened for the position we're in this country on this day.
And on that note, I want to hand you over to the in-house audience. Mr. Vishnu Mahadio is on standby. He shall be leading off this segment. 3 questions, please. I'm pleading with the members of the audience, please stick to your question. This is not about you, this is about the issue. Thank you.
Sis, I must say thank you very much for the opportunity. The question is this, is that we have two questions here, and I'll first ask the closest person next to me, and he's eager to answer his questions. Go ahead, sir.
Says, as a monitor of this program, I want to ask Khemraj, when he was given 5 minutes by the Speaker of the House on the debate of the vote.
Please tell us your name and
Dr.
so we can
Ramaya.
know.
Khemraj knows me well. Now the question is, from that speech itself, there was great indication that they had the majority. Bring it on. Amna Ali said that too. How they based that argument, bring it on, because they were 33 in the parliament. Mr. Ram indicated in 2014, when the PPP had 32, the opposition had 33. The parliament was prorogued. PPP did not go to that extent. Now, if Mr. Christopher Ram now is bringing an action against dual citizenship, how many persons do we have whose vote will not be counted as Charandas in the PNC in Parliament at this time? That's number one.
Just ask both of your questions, please, so we can take them concurrently. Yeah.
If we go into a constitutional crisis, the list that was already done for the next election was based upon the age of 14 years and above. It means that takes us back to 2020 election. Why is it that they have to do a house-to-house registration at this time when it is already done for the 2020 election?
Well, let me see if I could answer the very first one and the second one from Ramaya. I think there might be about 7 persons in all that would have that may have dual citizenship. The names were printed in the paper recently, and there are some that were born overseas and got their dual citizenship as a result of, I think Dominic Gaskin is one who was born in England. As a child, Carl Greenwich was also made a citizen of England. And I know Joe Harmon has indicated that he's also from our side. I think Gail Teixeira, Anamaya, and I think there's another person from the PPP that is with dual citizenship. In relation to the list, I wish to remind Ramaya and the viewers that there is supposed to be house-to-house registration in 7-year cycles. And that 7-year, I understand, finished last year. But we didn't have the funding last year for a house-to-house registration exercise. House-to-house is the best way of cleansing a list of voters from all the dead people and those who might have gotten their permanent residence and they've gone overseas. House-to-house registration is also the best method for also making those 14-year-olds or 12-year-olds who would have registered in 2011 and who now today are 18-year-old to be on the list. But there is also a third reason, and that is a house-to-house registration also makes certain that voters within the locality that they are presently living would vote in a polling booth near to that address that they are living. That is what house-to-house registration do. Because from 2011, I got a lot of police friends who from Port Morant or wheresoever, Manchester Village and so on, they are now living in perfect harmony. If an elections were to be held without that, and they don't make their claims and objections, they simply will have to go now to Manchester quarantine or Port Morant quarantine on elections day rather than vote at the place of their residence. So it helps enfranchise and ease the administrative burdens of finding a car to go there and so on. And that is why, in view of the fact that we agreed, both opposition and government, that we are going to have it this year, that is why we would like to see it happen this year.
Mr. Ram?
Well, you know, Mr. Ramjattan is probably not being dishonest, but he's being disingenuous. First of all, I'm assuming that Mr. Ramjattan read the Chief Justice's decision in relation to the dual passports. She specifically mentioned Dabdoud versus Vaz. Mr. Ramjattan is trying to protect Mr. Dominic Gaskin by suggesting that Dominic Gaskin was born abroad. That has absolutely nothing to do with it, Mr. Ramjattan, and I'm surprised you haven't informed yourself. The fact that the person as an adult has renewed the passport, don't shake your head, you know it. Don't embarrass yourself. That the person...
That's the first round, and that is what we are saying.
Mr.
We have to go to the Court of Appeal, we have to go to the CCJ, and you're giving an impression as if the thing is final.
Mr. Ramjattan, you know it is
all right,
final.
well, please, you can make your point. I will make mine.
But you keep interrupting me, and I wish you would stop.
Oh, well, I'm going to stop.
Good.
You go ahead.
Yes, this matter was the question of the passport was decided in Dabdoud versus Vaz, a Jamaican case. It was adopted, and that is the position throughout the world. So whether they want to keep Dominic Gaskin is their problem. They know. But I want to help Mr. Ramjattan because he doesn't seem to appreciate it. In answer to Dr. Maya's question, it is not in relation to 106, the number of people voting only. It is of all the elected members of the National Assembly. What we needed to have had, if there was residual decency, and I put the PPP in the same position as the AFC and the PNC, they, on that case being decided, they should have immediately withdrawn their members who did not qualify. I would like, so there's no question about it. On the question of the registration, Mr. Ramjattan must know the last time dead people vote in elections for Guyana was under the PNC. I've got the tables, friend. Ramjattan,
1985.
I've got the figures.
1985, I think it was.
Sorry?
1985, I think it was.
Yes, and how it stopped it. So that's the last time dead people do not vote, Mr. Ramjattan. And Mr. Ramjattan, you also know there's a claims and objections period. If your friends in Port Moran not see them name on the thing, they go and say, look, me want my name go the other day. There is room for that. Mr. Ramjattan, I'm asking you, please, Mr. Ramjattan, if you would tell me where in the law elections are subject to house-to-house registration. And if you will tell me in the Constitution where elections and the triggering of the 90 days are subject to anything by GCOM. And I would further like you to tell me, Mr. Ramjattan, where it is in the law or in practice that a constitutional body like GCOM is not required to take note of the Constitution and the decisions of the court. I would like you to help me so much with those.
Let me explain that. GCOM is that exclusive body that makes all these determinations, Christopher, if you didn't know. And under the Constitution, registration includes house-to-house registration. If you read the powers of the GCOM under the Constitution, not only the conduct of elections, but registration and a whole host of other things that it has exclusive. So that body, if it makes up its mind by a 4-3 majority, and this is like you're saying 32-3, that is valid. And if it is valid and they say we would like to have house-to-house registration, because over the years since 1992, we have been having a 7-year cycle of house-to-house registration. No court will say that that is an error on the part of GCOM, because that is an exercise of the prerogative of GCOM. And GCOM can do that by a simple majority of those present and voting.
The time is running on us, and we have someone from on the phone. So can we just go to that one call and then come back to Vishnu with another question? Caller on the line?
Yes, give us 1 second as we bring him in.
Hello, caller.
1 second, Says. I'm bringing him in.
Hello, caller.
Yes. Yes.
Can you please state your name and ask the question?
Yes, Gobin Harbhajan here from Borbis. I will put my question to Mr. Ram, and then I'll put one to you, but I will just speak so a normal man can understand. Yeah, my name is Gobin Harbhajan.
Yes, press on, press on.
All right. Now, my question is for Christopher Ram, Mr. Ram. I have been following your article on your constitution reform on oil and wealth management, etc. However, the opposition leader was in Borbis. He met with the Central Quarantine Chamber of Commerce. And it was mentioned to him about constitutional reform. He fully clearly said he will not support a constitutional reform for change. That will give bargaining power to the small party. My question to you is, where do you see, or where do you think constitutional reform is headed at this time? And my other question is to Says, I know you have fought against the PPP for mismanagement and corruption. Unfortunately, you see things different under this government. However, at this point, you believe a snap election will benefit Guyanese at whole? Thank you very much. If both y'all can answer it.
Well, I will. I'm not part of the panels. I don't want to dive into their time, but I can answer that question anytime publicly. But so I want to let's reserve it for Mr. Ramjattan. I'm wearing a different hat today as the moderator. I'm here to just make sure we have a smooth. But I'm very open to answering the question. So, Mr. Ram, and then we're back to Vishnu.
Thank you, sir, for your question. It would be truly unfortunate if the former president and now leader of the opposition did say that he's not going to engage in constitutional reform. In fact, Article 119 of the Constitution sets up a permanent body for the reform of the Constitution. So he must also subscribe to the tenets of the Constitution. But I want to make this point. The APN, the PNC and Ramjattan and all of them took active part in the formulation of this Constitution after Herdmanson. And when you have a player as President Granger, and you have a party as the APNU plus AFC, forget the Dead Meat story. That's a historical story. When people say, I am not going to subscribe and comply with the Constitution, which I am sworn to uphold. And that, in fact, is treason when you do that. So, Jagyo would be entirely wrong if he said that. 149C has elevated to a fundamental right, Article 13, which gives to the people of Guyana the right to participate in decision making affecting them. And surely, governance is one of those decision making phases. But the bigger issue, if you have people who are saying, I don't care what the rules say, I go into court. So let me give you an analogy. President Trump wins the elections, and somebody says, I don't, or after two terms, and he has to go, and he said, look, I'm not going. That is what democracy means. We have to play by the rules, even when they don't favor us, or when we perceive that they don't favor us. So you can have as much constitutional reform as you want. If you've got people, it's like playing a game of cricket. The person take the bat, Ramjattan knows a lot about cricket. They take the bat ball and say, going home. Y'all can play your own game. the game comes to an end. There's no longer, it ceases to be cricket. And that's the problem we have. I believe in constitutional reform. What this issue has shown, you cannot have an executive president. Because if you did not have this constitution, if you had a Trinidad type of constitution, you know what the head of state would have said to the, you better vacate your position. You know what the Queen of England did the morning after March 29th, 28 was the vote. Callahan went to the Queen and said, Your Majesty, please call elections. I lost the vote of confidence last night. Mr. Ramjattan knows about all of that. That is what, so you can have as much constitutional reform as you want. If you have people who are going to say, I'm not playing by the rules, and you have enablers like Ramjattan and Nagamutu and the others who encourage and facilitate it, then no amount of constitutional reform is going to help. I just want to say,
Mr. Ram, can I ask Mr. Ram,
let me just finish. I did say the first thing the Constitution says, Guyana, Article 1, we are a democratic, indivisible, secular, and democratic sovereign state, meaning we follow the tenets of democracy. And the fundamental principles of our democracy are enshrined in this document called the Constitution of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana, Chapter 101. Mr. Ramjattan knows about it.
Okay.
I know all about it. And
you know all about it. That's right. Yeah, you know everything.
I know about it. You give the impression as if we are violating the Constitution by going to court. I am telling you, look, I'm glad you raised the cricket analogy. Oh, you take up your bat and we go back home. Well, look, in this modern era, there is something called a replay. And a replay, we had the no confidence motion, and we have gone to court to let the court, because the speaker did say that he would like to have a court of competent jurisdiction deal with the issue as to whether it's 34 or 33, and the other legal opinions that were given to him, and when he made his ruling on the January 3rd. So we are still on that replay, because the replay has to go right up to the CCJ.
Well,
that is what
can I just follow up?
Can I follow up? The speaker, though, the speaker did give a ruling,
that's
and he
correct.
said,
and that was it.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
But whatever the speaker didn't make an opening that he said only a court of competent jurisdiction, and not he. He will not do it. Now, when we are going to the court of competent jurisdiction,
he did not say that. He said if you want. He said if you want, you can take it.
Whatever you were saying, Chris, I am telling you that indeed you go back and read the speaker's ruling. It was an opening where he said that a court of competent jurisdiction can deal with the matter. And so, like a replay, it is taking a while, but we are going to watch the replay and we're going to go right up to when that is final, and that is final at the CCJ. And that is my point.
Mr. Ram, can you, if you want to, before we go to Vishnu?
Mr. Listen, I keep back saying this is the Constitution, and Ramjattan knows. Surely, Mr. Ramjattan, you know, and please accept this, that you know a declaration is not subject to stay. You know that.
I am not talking even about a stay. If the lawyers want to go again, I would like the Court of Appeal to make the substantive ruling and the CCJ to make the substantive ruling.
So I want to ask a question, Mr. Ramjattan. If the CCJ says that whatever Roxanne George has declared, the Chief Justice, Honorable Chief Justice Roxanne George, has declared, and the ruling is duly passed, will the government recognize it?
Of course we will recognize it. What do you think we're doing? We are going to recognize it fully.
Okay. Can we go back to Vishnu with your second question?
Before we do that, we have an online question.
Yeah, we have an online question first. But I would just like to inform our panel that our online viewers have exceeded over 200, and we have a lot of comments coming in. One in particular is from Miss Annette Arjun, who has been a loyal follower for the past 3 weeks. And she said, constitutional reform is useless if the Constitution will continue to be disrespected. We also have a question from online that says, what is the coalition plan after March 20th if there's no extension in Parliament?
Can we let them answer that question? That's a good question. Mr. Ramjattan, can you answer that question?
If after 21st of March, there is a ruling made by the CCJ that indeed it is valid, that is the no confidence, we will have to, at that point then, ask, of course, the readiness of GCOM to conduct an elections before the president can advise himself as to the dissolution.
But what happens if the CCJ rules on April 30th?
Well, there is uncharted waters. Obviously, it will be uncharted waters. Because you have what is called
a dictatorship. That's what you have.
Yeah, well, the government of the day will have on that day, 10 days after 21st of March, will have to say, well, fine, we have to now go to an elections. We must go to an elections because the final court has ruled. And if the confidence motion or no confidence was in order, we have to go and have the elections. In that time period, that the Elections Commission will say it can carry it out.
Okay, Mr. Ram, any reaction?
I would wonder if Mr. Ramjattan would cite the section of the Constitution that enables that to take place.
Again, Christopher Ram, what then will take place? You want the whole country to collapse? The doctrine of necessity will say that the existing government, in the Esther Pereira case, will then have to hold elections. Who then will call it? You want Jagdeo to call it or Christopher Ram to call it?
Well, there's only one person to call in elections.
No, I'm just utilizing who then should call it? Who should dissolve Parliament?
But on that note, though, we need to make it very clear. GCOM does not call an election in Guyana. Only one person is
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah. A question for you, Mr. Ramjattan. What is the difference between the cabinet, which includes the president, and the government in the context of Article 106?
Well, that is giving me some problems. The cabinet obviously means the president and the ministers that he has. The Constitution makes provision for a cabinet whereby it is constituted of the president and the ministers that he has appointed, and as a collegiate body that deals with matters of governance and government. That is the long and short of it, in my opinion. There is the fact that the Constitution was so framed to say that, notwithstanding that the government and the president remains in office along with the ministers and so on, does give me the impression that the framers there meant the executive branch too. But of course, a number of people are saying that is not so. But in any event, since you cannot have a vacuum in governance or in government, it certainly means then that the ministers and the president can meet wherever they want to meet outside of the arrangement, like in a cabinet room, and they can do their business, in my view.
So this leads to the question for you, Mr. Ram. I want you to respond to Mr. Ramjattan, but are there ministers in the government now at this current point? Or is this because they're not meeting as a cabinet anymore? They're meeting in a different arrangement. Please elucidate, Mr. Ram.
Just before that, I should say that I'm not surprised that Mr. Ramjattan has a difficulty with understand what cabinet vis-a-vis government is. It's very clearly laid out, but Mr. Ramjattan says he has a problem. Mr. Ramjattan keeps repeating this rubbish about doctrine of necessity, and I really do suggest that Mr. Ramjattan go back and read this. Now, the Chief Justice has ruled, and you know, it doesn't matter, do we have a democracy or do we not? Do we go to the court every time we don't agree with something? Of course you have a right to. That's not how democracies operate. That's not how countries operate. This is why the business community is where it is. And to call it a ministerial plenary, it shows the contempt which this government continues to have for the Constitution. And to say, oh, we don't no longer give our no objections to the $15 million contracts. we have taken ministerial note. It is making a mockery. And Mr. Ramjattan, your reputation and your legacy has been so badly destroyed. I know you're going to say, you're my friend still, believe me. You are my friend.
You will forever be my friend,
thanks,
Chris.
Khemraj. Thank you, Khemraj. You are allowing yourselves to be manipulated, to do things that you yourself. I
have a mind of my own, Chris. You know that. I got kicked out of the PPP because of the mind that I have.
All right. Let me finish.
Yes,
let me finish, please.
All right.
Let me finish.
So there's
we
200
need to be
questions online, but we can't go through them. So could we give the Guyanese public a chance to speak? Devin, can you come in with some of those online questions?
Yes, we have another online question. It is from Mr. Christopher Lawrence. I want to ask Ramjattan, why is the no confidence motion of 2014, which didn't happen, different from 2018? One, how come it would have worked for the APNU, but somehow can't work for the PPP?
All right, just add on another question so we can have a combined answer.
Yes, we do have one, and this is from one of our guests here, Mr. Mike Assad. This is an opportunity for you to ask your question, sir.
Mr. Ramjattan, how are you?
I'm doing fine.
Listen, you made references to U.S. constitutional practice, specifically the 2000 election debacle in Florida. You know, constitutions in the United States have timetable or a schedule, a scheme and a schedule. But all these issues, constitutional issues, must be resolved in such a way that the schedule is kept, the schedule or the timetable is kept. Why is it that in Guyana you have a constitutional problem, the NCM vote, and the government is challenging that vote, but these issues can be and should be resolved to keep the 90-day deadline for the new elections? Well, I understand you're going through the court processes and you're going through 3 layers of court. Still, these courts should resolve the issue within the 90 days so that the election can be held within the 90 days. That's how it is done in the United States. Secondly, you are making reference to the Elections Commission. You're saying that's a constitutional body. They have prerogatives. Sir, constitutional bodies in the United States and every other country where you have constitutional rule, these bodies are subject to that same constitution. They must function within that same constitution. Why is it that these problems can't be resolved within the 90 days? Thank you.
Okay, so the 2 questions, the first one is from, no, before we go further, let them answer the question. The first question is, what is the difference in the no confidence motion between 2014 and now? And then Mike's questions. Mr. Ramjattan first, then Mr. Ram.
Yeah, look, in the 2014 scenario, there are some distinctions. We never got to vote on the no confidence motion. When it was filed, the PPP government avoided it for I think about a month and a half until our speaker, Raphael Trotman, demanded that a voting day must be put on it. And then immediately after, we had a situation whereby we were literally, and that is what a prorogation is, chased out of Parliament. Parliament was prorogued. We couldn't go back to Parliament. And that took almost, from the time we filed our no confidence motion to the time when Parliament was dissolved, 8 months passed. Now, assuming we had voted, and as you're arguing that it was 33, and I then had argued that it was 33 too, in all honesty, we would have gotten to have elections in 90 days. But what the smartness of Anil Nandalal and the president of the day, they said, well, we're going to prorogue Parliament for some 6 months. And we had the elections until May, I think, of 2015, from October 2014, when we wanted it, when we filed it. So there was definitely a delay of longer than 90 days, because had we that night of the 13th of October 2014 debated it and voted on it, well, fine. Now, let me say this. Indeed, at that point in time, Myself, even Christopher Ram, and so on, had, of course, argued the case that it is 33 was the vote. I did not know of the Hughes Rogers case. I did not know of the Vanuatu case. And indeed, after it was brought to my attention by Stephen Fraser and also Nigel Hughes, who first publicly made an announcement of it, then I said, well, yes, indeed, we should give this a shot, because Stephen Fraser had done an extensive legal opinion that it is 34, which Anil Nandalal had asked him to do. And I utilized that as part of changing my mind. You could say it's hypocritical. Well, fine, that's your opinion. Mine was being brought to the attention of a brand new set of cases and a legal opinion from one of our foremost constitutional lawyers, namely Stephen Fraser, and another, Nigel Hughes. Why not? And that is what changed my mind. So,
Mr. Ram?
Yeah.
Well, Mr. Ramjattan's recollection of the facts continues to operate against him. I said at the beginning that the reason, and Khemraj and I spoke almost daily on that particular situation. The reason he did not push the no confidence motion, and I think I have a fairly decent recollection of this, is that he was not certain how the I think it was the PNC or the APNU was going to treat with it. That was the delay. Now, on the question of the two cases, Mr. Ramjattan knows, Mr. Ramjattan is no fool. Mr. Ramjattan knows the Rogers case and the Vanuatu case are so conceptually different and based on such different rules. What is so difficult for Mr. Ramjattan or Mr. Nigel Hughes? I'm not going to blame. I think it's most inappropriate for Mr. Ramjattan to be calling Mr. Stephen Fraser's name publicly like this. That was a professional engagement. I think it's most improper. Mr. Ramjattan is a lawyer. He should know that. Nigel Hughes went public on this thing. He should be held responsible for this. Mr. Ramjattan knows enough about arithmetic to know that 33 is the majority number in 65. You don't have to go to any Vanuatu case or Eastern Caribbean case. So, Mr. Ramjattan, please don't call anybody's name that it's not proper for you to do.
All right, so moving on, we're an hour into the program, so which means that we are past the halfway mark for sure. After March 20th, Mr. Ram, this is a question for you. Can the members of the National Assembly return to the House to extend the date retroactively, or that meeting has to happen before 12 midnight on March 20th? Mr. Ram?
The formal, I think we're in the 10th Parliament, Mr. Ramjattan. Is this the 10th or the 11th? 11th. The 11th Parliament has not yet been dissolved. So there is no reason in my mind that this cannot happen. But what is important is for Mr. Granger as president to start acting on the no confidence motion, which he promised to do. Now, Mr. Jagdeo called on Mr. Harman on the very night of December 21 and said we need to get together and decide the way forward. It took Mr. Granger 18 days. And Mr. Granger wanted to know what Jagdeo wants to talk about. Which la-la land is Granger living in? Doesn't he know that there's a constitutional crisis? Mr. Ramjattan himself admitted that we're facing a constitutional crisis. Doesn't the president of the country know that? And since he's a vice president, shouldn't he tell Mr. Granger, look, you are brooding here one of the worst constitutional crises to confront Guyana in its post-independence history, and the first in which a government, Mr. Ramjattan, if you can find one, I would ask you, please send it to me, where in the history of no confidence motions, Ireland, UK, South Africa, India, if you can find a single one where a no confidence motion was passed successfully, that the leader or the political leader, whoever that person is, did not comply, I would like you, and I will publicly apologize to you. You're good at quoting Vanuatu, you're good at quoting Rogers. Find that case for me, please, and send it to me.
We do have a reporter from Georgetown, I think it's Dennis Sherbal, who wants to ask, and this is excellent that the local media is joining us. So I'm transferring the call over to the line. Caller, you're on the line.
Yes, please give us 1 second as we bring him on.
Mr. Dennis Sherbal, good afternoon and welcome.
Hello.
Please answer.
Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Good afternoon, Dennis.
Yes, Minister Ramjattan, I want to ask you a question. Basically, it is whether the president can, in fact, prorogue Parliament if there is no agreement between himself and the opposition leader with respect to the extension of the life of the House after March 21. Is prorogation an option open to the president? Thank you.
I want to believe that the prorogation is an option. It is there. The president by proclamation can prorogue Parliament. The president can exercise his power to dissolve Parliament. I am absolutely certain that the president is not going to prorogue Parliament, but is going to seek the support of the opposition leader in the context of when GCOM will be ready to hold the elections, and then in that timeline dissolve and step the elections date.
Mr. Ram, your reaction to Dennis' question?
Hi, Dennis. How are you doing? He gone? Okay.
He's left. He's left.
The fact that a vote has been taken, prorogation is not the same situation as it was in 2014. They're wanting lawyers or even people with common sense, because what is law other than logic? The one thing that we have is a vote of no confidence has been successfully passed. The question of prorogation now does not apply. It is dissolution, it is calling of elections and dissolution. Section 1067 is absolutely clear. It is written in plain English. You don't need to use all kind of Latin words for that. It is written in plain English. And that is the only option available to President Granger. And I can see where President Granger has a problem, because Mr. Ramjattan, who is one of the senior lawyers in the cabinet, seems to have a problem. Mr. Harman has a problem. He doesn't seem to know when you sign a note what it means. Mr. Nagamutu has a problem. These are serious. When you have people, like we have a man who heads the petroleum division who said, I have not read, and Khemraj, I don't know if you heard that, this man said he hasn't read the EXO, the SO contract. How can you tolerate such incompetence? And are you surprised?
The most brilliant fella in Guyana is that same fella, Christopher Ram. He know from A to Z and everything. You know, Chris, you're getting very annoying now. This is not a dialogue. How many arguments are being made from third parties that are not here?
This is why we need to stay with
I asked my opinion, and I gave my opinion.
Let me finish. Let me respond. No, let me respond. Mr. Ramjattan,
please let's stay.
Mr. Ramjattan, you can get as irate as you wish. I was saying,
you could get as ad hominem as you wish.
You raised
Go
Mr.
ahead.
Fraser's number. What I said.
Reflect on
all people are going to attack everybody now.
I said.
Please.
I said.
I want to stop what to do. Let's have a cool out. I just want to make this announcement. Those people who are out there, please take out your pen and copy these numbers. Guyana 2259054. I repeat, 2259054. The USA 718-551-3290. Canada 647-557-6200. Please, callers, call in. I know it's getting a little bit heated, but please, your friends, let's deal with the issues. Over to you, Mr. Ram and Mr. Ramjattan.
I was saying, Mr. Ramjattan didn't wait for me to finish. He got a little bit hot, but we all do from time to time. I was saying that's why the government lost the vote of no confidence because it is not governing properly. That's the problem. That's what a vote of no confidence, it says we can no longer have confidence in you governing the country. That's what it is. It is not a political...
No, we lost the no confidence motion because we had a Judas in Charan Das in our 33. Just before, just for it.
You should ask him to withdraw that remark.
He said he's going to sue
Mr.
me.
Sis, you
Let
should
him
ask,
sue me, and I
you
hope
should ask
that
him
he
to withdraw
don't
that remark.
execute it.
Can I, as the moderator, make a point?
You should ask him to withdraw that remark.
That when
I will not withdraw the statement because the 5 minutes before we went into Parliament, he said he's going to vote no. Inside of, after going and eating dinner there, he said, Prax, you proper harass them. I the one talk and fish them up a little bit too. All of that. And then went to vote, the man said, yes, yes, yes.
All right, but I wanted to...
That is not the Judas. Well, please.
Can I ask a question? Can I ask a question?
Let me make a point.
Can I ask a question?
Let me use the moderator's prerogative. In earlier years, both Mr. Ramjattan and Mr. Trotman had the right to cross the floor. And it was recognized. I celebrated that right too, and many of Guyanese celebrated that right. I believe the right to vote is important. You do not have to be always with the flock if you find that is lost confidence in the government.
Yeah, that is true, but the conscience vote must not be exercised in a manner where you are fooling people that you're going to do that. And by the way, why he never told us? He is in television with me in Barbies saying that the decisions on sugar and all our decisions are correct. I have all the tapes here for whatever litigation he may bring against me, because I will prove what I am saying. Now, we begged all our members, this must be a party line vote. He said yes inside of that meeting at the committee room downstairs. And this man went
just like you, again, had the right after reviewing Mr. Stevens Fraser's opinion.
Exactly, well, fine.
But something happened between that room and the time when he sat to vote that caused him to change his mind. But I don't know.
No. We have certain circumstantial bits that cause me to say pieces of silver.
Well, you have a right to say your opinion. Yes, Mr. Ram. Go on, Mr. Ram.
I really think this is degenerating. The Minister of Security is accusing this.
I have made my accusations.
Let me finish. This man is responsible.
Members of society in Guyana, please let me take control of this. I want to do a special shout out to the Guyanese people living in Guyana. Happy Republic. If you have a few minutes from your celebration, I'm imploring you to please call on 22-59054. Let's go on. I have a question for both of you, Mr. Ramjattan. Do you think GCOM is showing operational inertia? And please explain your answer as you give it.
No, it is not. It is absolutely not showing any operational inertia. We know from a very long time that for elections to be held in Guyana, it takes about 180 days. That was the ruling that was made even by Steve Surjbali when we had that same 2014 no confidence motion. The business community also said, we don't know where Ramjattan and them going with their no confidence motion. We are not ready for elections and all of that. They have no change. Okay, but things can change. I agree.
Mr. Ram,
we also have a house-to-house registration exercise that I mentioned earlier that we would like to see so that we can have a cleaner, purer list for the next election.
Mr. Ram, your reaction, do you think GCOM has operational inertia at this point in time?
But you will have to allow me to finish, continue where... When I ask, I do not think it is appropriate for Mr. Ramjattan to deem Mr. Charandas Prasad as Judas. He is the Minister of Public Security. He controls the police. If he has evidence that this man has taken pieces of silver, he should prove it or subject himself to a defamation case. He must.
I am subjecting myself for defamation action. You didn't hear me, Chris? Okay.
Maybe you're shouting too much. Now, secondly,
subjecting himself to defamation action, Christopher Ram. So Charandas will have to...
I don't think he should use your program for this purpose.
Prosecuted.
I don't think he should.
So
But
let's move to
on,
the
the, on
GCOM
this
question,
question, on this question, the motion of no confidence. First of all, elections were held with a list on what's November the 12th, I think it was? November the 12th. GCOM and the government had information of a notice of no confidence on the 16th of November. That is, to this day, 102 days. Up to now, GCOM is fiddling around saying, oh, we don't know, we don't have money, we have to ask, we're waiting for instructions. And the president is saying, oh, that's up to GCOM. 102 days and they have done nothing. Mr. Ramjattan has accused this man of Judas. Mr. Ramjattan asked people like me, Khemraj, I'm confronting you that you asked me to vote for the AFC, APNU. And you said,
yes, I did.
You said that you will stand up for constitutional reform. Where have you?
And I am standing up for it.
No, you
have a different opinion, buddy. That is your problem. You feel that you know the answers to all these questions. You know that the CCJ is going to rule already. That's your problem.
Mr. Ramjattan, you yourself said that we have failed the people in constitutional reform. Have you forgotten something is wrong with your brains?
Nothing is wrong with my brains.
Wrong with your brains?
Gentlemen,
absolutely nothing wrong with my brain.
Gentlemen, we have online questions.
Take my moderator prerogative and take the show to an end if we cannot keep this how we started. Now we're getting to the end of the show, but there's people who want to talk to you. Can you guys please listen to them for a second? I want to hand you over to Devin, who has some more comments from the online audience. Over 200 people have posed questions to you. Can we please listen to one of them?
Yes, I would just like to inform the panel that our viewers have now increased to over 350. And I would like to read a comment from Mr. Suresh Bobby. It looks like everyone is against Mr. Ramjattan and Mr. Harbachan. You all have to at least be open that you're lucky to have two men making contributions. I have a question, though, from Mr. Lennox Schumann. He's the leader of the Liberty and Justice Party. He has one question. Considering that the elections were triggered by the NCM, it is not implied that elections are mandated regardless of GCOM's position?
Two questions. Let's hear the other one. Let's hear the other question.
The next question is a caller from Trinidad.
Oh, no, I thought you said Lennox had two questions.
Sorry, one question.
Okay, and let's...
The question that Lennox has asked there is important again, but that is why we're going to keep repeating ourselves. Notwithstanding the results of that no confidence motion, it is also clearly the case for GCOM to be in the best position to hold the elections. And GCOM has always never been able to do it within 90 days. As I have said what Steve Sturge-Bally said. Of course, Chris will have a different opinion and say that we had notice or the GCOM had notice 102 days ago. The trouble is that when would they start with the process? Because they had a plan, from what I understand from the GCOM commissioners now, to hold house-to-house registration. So even though you have the no confidence motion, the readiness of holding it within that 90 days depends on another constitutional body called the GCOM. And if GCOM will not be ready in 90 days, it can't be held in 90 days.
Mr. Ram?
I quite frankly, what does one say to that? GCOM must know that it has 90 days at any time, not only from November, at any time. Or since the constitutional amendment, that there's always this live possibility. And don't forget, in the Independence Constitution, we had no confidence as well. There is always the possibility of elections. I asked Mr. Ramjattan to point out in the Constitution to me where it says the elections under 1067 are subject to any readiness by GCOM. He has not been able to do that. He has not been able to
I have done that. Please, do not misrepresent. I am telling you the provisions in the Constitution that empowers GCOM states it there. And it is an omnibus clause that gives them the total power in relation to the calling of elections. And they even have a power under a certain other article 162, I think, which indicates that they can postpone elections even when you dissolve parliament and all of that, and they are not ready because of extra hardships. They can postpone it. So if they can do that after a discussion,
Mr. Chairman, you should at least ask your guests, including me, to be honest when they are going to cite anything. We must
this is for the public record.
Yes, exactly. And therefore we should not.
And it's recorded.
Now, the postponement.
I found it. I've gotten my constitution, please. It's Article 162. The Elections Commission shall have such functions connected with or relating to the registration of electors or the conduct of elections as conferred to it by this Constitution or subject thereto any act, Parliament, and subject to the provision, the Commission shall exercise general direction and supervision over the registration of electors and the administrative conduct of all elections of members of the National Assembly.
Good.
That is 162. Registration and election.
Mr. Chairman, I keep saying we at least have to have decency. If we're going to accuse people of being Judas and taking silver, we must be prepared to provide some evidence. On the 162, it specifically says, and subject to the provisions of this Constitution. In other words, 106.7 does not say sub.
Okay.
Can I finish? Can I finish?
It does not say. There was a call from Trinidad, guys. We rarely get calls from Trinidad and Tobago. So can we take Mr. Williams from Trinidad? Devin?
Yes, we are bringing him on right now.
Mr. Williams from Trinidad is online for, you have Mr. Ramjattan and Mr. Christopher Ram, both senior members of the Guyanese Society here, ready to take your calls. Mr. Williams, you're online. Mr. Williams, you're online. Mr. Williams, we can see you. Can you ask a question?
Yes, good evening. First, I would say good evening to the panel, good evening to you, Honorable Minister Ramjattan, and to you, Mr. Ram and Mr. Sesnarain. My question is, the leader of the opposition, the Honorable Dr. Jagdeo, has stated in the public media that once the 21st of March has passed that deadline, he's calling on the international community to sanction Guyana. My question to the Honorable Minister Ramjattan is, we as Guyanese citizens, I have dual citizenship to Trinidad, but we as citizens of Guyana, is this what we want? Can't we see what is going on currently in Haiti? There's a lot of rioting. Is this what we want, really, honestly? That is my question.
Do you have a question for Mr. Ram?
Mr. Williams, absolutely. We do not want rioting, and it is my opinion that we are not going to get any rioting. I don't know who Mr. Jagdeo or Dr. Jagdeo is going to put on the streets, because people want law and order in this country, and that is what this government will provide. We have, as we said, a two-limb approach to this question of going to the CCJ. You can't deny our right of accessibility to the courts of the land. And we also are going to await the readiness of GCOM. I maintain that. And I think that the large majority of the Guyanese people understand the two limbs that we are hanging our hats on, or the two pegs. And that is totally legitimate and legal. If people feel that that is a violation of the Constitution and they want to go and riot, well, of course, at that point in time, we are going to deal with that. But the vast majority, the business community do not want rioting in the streets. The PPP doesn't want that. The PNC, our AFC, all the members of the APNU do not want that. So I don't know what is the speculation here. We do not want anything of that nature that is happening in Haiti.
Can I ask a question, man? Is this a debate between Mr. Ram and
Yes, can we go to Vishnu, for asking some questions, please?
Yes, sir. I actually have a comment. First of all, it says, I am confounded to note why people need to know the government's position on this matter rather than galvanizing support for a constitutional election. So that is one of the statement that could be I'm throwing it out open so we can get some response.
Okay,
and
can
I
we get
also
some
have one
questions
from
the floor?
Dr. Ramaya. He has a follow-up question.
No, but can we get some fresh faces? Then, if we have time, we'll give Mr.
Sis,
Ramaya.
I think this is important for you to listen. I have to say that to you. Number one, I don't think my brother Charandas is a Judas. I do not think Barajagdev is a Judas because since November, that motion was moved in Parliament. So the government of the day should realize that that motion came because something was there for a no confidence motion. However, Khemraj should not talk about that honesty because he and Moses, Nigel, they were all on my television program for years and saying that they will not join hands with the PPP or the PNC. What happened today to the people of Guyana?
All right, let's move to another questions, and we'll ask two questions, and then we'll have to ask Mr. Ramjattan, Mr. Ram. Another question, please. Another question, and then we'll have both answers.
That's nonsense. You're trying to do something, please.
Please.
No, I don't believe you, please. Answer the question. Answer the question.
I will answer the question. Indeed, yes, it is true. I have made a statement that we are going to be very much in a seriously grave situation if we were to join up with one or two of the parties. And that was made very early when the AFC came into being. But realizing in a situation that had PR as the voting method and realizing how corrupt the PPP was getting, I had to change my political posture to ensure that we get the PPP out of government. Because there it is, if you get a plurality, and the PPP had the more votes, and that was proven in the 2011 elections, they got a minority government. They did not want to hold local government elections. They did not want the procurement commission, all the things that you were fighting for. And since they did not want to do that, we then had to, what is the next strategy, notwithstanding your earlier statements? Next strategy is to try to get a change in government. And then we had, in my view, a very brand new leader of the PNC, David Granger, who I got along with and I saw as an extremely good, decent person that I could have coalesced with to ensure that we win the elections and have a change in government. And that is what I did. So when Ramaya was one of the onlyest person in my committee, the executive committee of the AFC, who voted against that when the question was put. Because indeed, we asked a very wide national executive meeting. Ramaya was there. We have a problem in the plurality situation. We are going to bring back the PPP back in government again. How do you get rid of the PPP? You had to coalesce. And I made the decision that yes, indeed, this is the way to go, but I had to get the democracy of my party in place. And one vote was the one, and that was Ramaya. Ramaya said, Mina, join that Black People Party.
You're too lying.
And that was the reason why he did not.
Khemraj, you can hear me, you're lying.
All right, guys, we're on international TV. I would like to have a follow-up question from the audience. There are many people in the back seats. Please, let's give them a chance. Vishnu Mahadio, we're looking for some additional questions.
Okay. Gentlemen, it's very important that you inform the Guyanese people with the correct information because Guyana is already in a crisis and confusion. GCOM, Mr. Ramjattan, you says it's an autonomous, independent body that makes its decision. And you cited that there a certain time for which they can hold election. However, because what's happening now, a constitutional crisis, it's like the game of cricket. You have so many overs, and if there's rain, now you have the Duckworth-Lewis formula that steps into play, which means that all of a sudden, the game has to be done in a certain number of overs. That's why we have the 90 days here. Everything has to be expedited in the 90 days. So I think it's important that you explain this properly so the people of Guyana can understand and know how best to move forward.
Thank you, sir. Christopher Ram, that's for you, and then Mr. Ramjattan.
Well, I think I've listened. I've become part of the audience of this program because you've allowing, Mr. Chairman, people's character to be smeared, and that is not proper. I think you are as guilty of defamation as Mr. Ramjattan is. You need to bear that in mind. I also heard misinformation being peddled. Now, if Mr. Ramjattan talk about GCOM being able to postpone elections, all he has to do is read 162.2, and it only arises, it says this, notwithstanding anything to the contrary in this constitution, if the Elections Commission is satisfied that the holding of an election pursuant to paragraph 2 of Article 60 or Article 162 on the day appointed therefore. In other words, first and foremost, you must have a day appointed therefore.
That's correct. That's correct.
Well, you did not say that, Mr. Ramjattan.
I said that after the dissolution.
Please let me finish.
No, but don't misrepresent me.
No,
what happens here?
Mr. Ramjattan, I am being accused of giving you more than enough liberty.
Yeah,
Please
well,
let's respect
Mr. Ram is good at.
Please, let's respect
chastises everybody.
Chance to speak, please.
It says, appointed on the day appointed therefore, would be attended either generally or in a particular area by danger or serious hardship. In other words, the circumstances is narrowly circumscribed. I also I don't want to point out to Mr. Ramjattan what law and legal drafting is. If 162 was to make GCOM the final arbiter, it would have said, notwithstanding any other provision or article of this constitution, the Elections Commission shall. And if he wants to make 106 subject, it would have said subject to any other provision of this constitution. That's how it is. I don't want to get involved.
Why are you now saying that about notwithstanding, but in 107, 106.7, you're not giving that meaning to notwithstanding, Chris?
Mr. Ramjattan, thank you for raising it. The Chief Justice particularly, because Mr. Ramjattan's new legal mentor, Mr. Basil Williams, tried to raise that argument, and she knocked it down. He said what?
Yes, but that is the same thing. Ian Chang ruled that you could have a third term.
If Mr. Ramjattan keeps interrupting me.
Listen to me. We can also have a final court overruling Roxanne.
Mr. Ramjattan, please let Mr. Ram finish his point, because it's important that we have some balance here. I am trying to moderate this, but you know,
don't let him squeeze your conscience because he tells you you're defending.
I'm a Democrat and I allow people to have their say. I will fight for their say. So let Mr. Ram have his say.
No, all I'm doing is because Mr. Ramjattan knows he has no point. He really does. But he's been brave enough, he's been courageous enough, decent enough to come in this program, and I commend him for that. But he knows his case is extremely weak. All I'm doing is trying to correct when he makes clearly mistakes.
I want to ask a direct question of Mr. Ram.
Yes.
If the extension is not granted before May 20th, right, and the Chancellor is not sworn in as the interim president, would you say that the former members of the cabinet at that time, they're right now in government, but former members of the cabinet who came to office in May 2015, would they be deemed resigned on March 21st? And could they be charged in a criminal court for malfeasance, misconduct, misspending of public monies if they continue to spend public monies after March 20th?
Well, first of all, March 20th has nothing to do with the cabinet. At the moment, they are former members of the cabinet. Mr. Ramjattan is a former member of the Granger cabinet.
Well, if you notice, I called him Mr. Ramjattan. I didn't refer to him as a minister because I myself personally do not recognize that there is a cabinet.
No,
in
he's a
action.
minister. He's a Khemraj just standing up for you. He's still a minister.
Please do. Please
He's still
do.
a minister. He's not a cabinet member because there's no cabinet. After
Yes.
March 21st, there ceased to be legitimate. There ceased to be a legitimate government, and that would include the president, and that would include all his ministers, including the cabinet members who would already have been deemed resigned on the night of December 21st. And on the 90 days after, they would have ended because they have not used the constitutional mechanism of calling the leader of the opposition and say, look, we've got some problems. We think this man that we've imposed on GCOM and imposed on the country is improper, can't make it. We can't have elections. Let us work something as near as possible. And you then say, all right, we're going to allow it, but subject to these conditions. You can't go wasting government money and calling it ministerial outreach. 1 week ago, 19 people descended on Letem. Mr. Ramjattan knows that it cannot be justified by any stretch of the imagination, by any rules of governance. One minister was speaking to me. He said, you know, they had me, campaigning, and then he corrected himself. He said, oh, I had to look at some projects. That happened, Khemraj. I talked to some people, please believe me.
Sardines.
Well, that's your opinion. You're giving the impression that it is illegal. Well, the question was asked by Sis to you. What makes it illegal? Well, I don't know. You were telling me to quote the section that GCOM got.
I said
you quoted the penalty.
Okay, all right. Can I just? I want to move the
167.
conversation out to Vishnu. Vishnu, this is the final question from the in-house audience because we are coming to wrap-up time. So please choose somebody from the back of the room. Let's get them speak. Have not spoken before on the show. Vishnu,
from the online, from the telephone, and then we'll be getting on back to you.
Okay, put someone who's not spoken before. Please say your name and which country you're calling from. Caller,
Hello.
please say your name and country.
My name is Pradeep Bachchan, and I'm calling from Guyana. My question is to Mr. Christopher Ram. What would have happened if Mr. Charandas, 2 weeks before his conscience vote, if he had voted against the budget, what would have happened constitutionally? And my second question to Mr. Ram is that sugar is failing all over the Caribbean. And now Mr. Charandas said his vote is based on the sugar workers. We know sugar has been failing even in Guyana. So my question is that why would he now, after all these months being on TV, all the years, defending the government movement, and now he's against it, suddenly? So I want to know why is it he waited, he could have voted against the budget, he did not. And if he voted against the budget, what would happen? And I would like to comment on the sugar industry across the Caribbean. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Ram.
Thank you very much, sir, for that very interesting question. Now, the rules of a constitution is a framework document than a full set of laws take volumes. The convention is this: if a government fails to get its budget passed, it goes for a vote of confidence in the National Assembly, and if it doesn't win it, it resigns and it calls fresh elections. That's how it will happen. As far as the sugar is concerned, I am on record as writing that sugar was too big to succeed. The arrangement for sugar with all the disparate estates and with the top-heavy administrative costs. And let me be careful, we're auditors of Gaisuku, but I'm talking about it then, and those comments will probably still apply. Mr. Charandas, of course, should have raised this issue. And I don't know whether he did it in the AFC. He's a member of the AFC. I don't know what Mr. Ramjattan's position on sugar was. Was Mr. Ramjattan's position to close these estates as the government did? I don't know. And Mr. Ramjattan, I'm sure, can ask himself. It was clear that sugar was being used as a political football, I dare say, by the PPPC administration. And I spoke up loudly and vociferously against it. I continue to say that. I think it has been badly handled by this government. They closed it down without thinking of what do you do with 7,000 people and an average of 4 dependents in communities that have no other job opportunities. What are you doing? Are you prepared to put them on the breadline, or are you punishing them for supporting a different political party? I don't know what the answers to those questions are, but it's clear that sugar has been handled from many, many years ago. Mr. Ramjattan could probably say why they took a position on sugar without considering alternative mechanisms, and why it was that the sugar workers had to go to court to get an order for the sugar workers to be paid the termination and severance pay, which they are entitled to under the laws of Guyana.
It is standard operating procedure in the law.
Look, let me answer that very straightforward. Sugar, since we came into the government, took up $36 billion in the first 3 years of our government. Literally every month we had to bail out sugar, to pay sugar workers and to do other things with the monies at $1 billion per month for 36 months. Now it was dragging the economy down, because like a businessman, if you got 4 businesses and 3 of them profitable and 1 now you got to take the money out of the profits out of the rest and put it there, we are going to go a very bad way. We could have gone like Venezuela. We had to make a decision to right size, and please don't double up the figures, Chris. It is about 4,000 workers. I don't know if 7,000 is what we severed. It's about 4,000. In any event, at the very beginning of last year, we did not have all the monies to pay them their severance. And we promised that we are going to pay them by December of 2018. We did that.
That's a good question. That's a good, but how can a government that has no money to pay sugar workers find close to $1.2 billion to settle outstanding expenditure for the Durban Park parade ground?
Well, look, you're bringing in another issue that when we wanted to celebrate our anniversary, I think it's the 50th anniversary, we had to have a big enough park. But by that time, we had already given about $17 billion to the sugar workers. But okay, even if you want to say that the park was misspending, we don't feel so. What happens with $36 billion? You simply got to go and bail them out all the time. When people in Barbados, this is the trouble. Barbados, and the fella asked the question about what happened in the other Caribbean countries. Barbados took its sugar estate lands and made golf courses. And you have to diversify.
I'm not disagreeing, but what I'm saying is that after sending home, and the figures is more than 5,000 workers, after sending home those workers, Gaisupu is still a drain on the state today. I mean,
well, it's far less in the context of what I now understand. And we could not have perennially go on bailing it out. And we had to make the decision to right size. I supported the decision after scrutinizing, and I went over to meet Mr. Clive Thomas, myself, and David Patterson to get all the figures right, and then we had to make a call. That is what you have executive government.
But running a country, and you would know this best because you sit in the front seat, it's not about dollars and cents only. There's socio-economic.
We agree with that. We agree with that. But you have to make the judgment call. If you feel that our judgment call was wrong and that we should have continuously be giving them $1 billion a month, what happens now to your soldiers and your teachers and your nurses and all of them? They are also crying out for increases too.
All right, we're running out of time. So Vishnu, the final question from the floor. I'm asking you to ask the final question from the floor.
Well, sis, we must take this opportunity also to let everyone know that we have a viewership of in excess of 500 tracking with us live on Facebook and on WhatsApp. I have Mr. Leland Rupnarayan with a very quick question.
Final question.
following the ruling of the Chief Justice, the Honorable Roxanne George, that dual citizenship is illegal for members of Parliament, why?
It's working.
I'm hearing you, Leland.
Yeah, yeah. So I was saying, why does Mr. Greenwich continue in the role as acting Prime Minister when it's been decided by the High Court that dual citizenship is illegal in the country? Secondly, the now coalition government, when they were in opposition, refused to approve expenditure when Mr. Jagdeo and his cronies were building the Marriott Hotel. Now that they would be in the minority, now that they have become a failed government, would they be following the same footsteps that they did in the past by refusing expenditure? And what are they going to do about the super salaries that they paid themselves? Would they stop receiving these salaries, seeing that there will be a non-functional government?
Okay, Mr. Ramjattan first, and then Mr. Ram, and then I'll ask you final words.
Well, look, I don't find that the salaries that we are having are super salaries at all. That was the final question. If we're going to stop paying ourselves super salaries, I don't find that they're super salaries. What was the second question? It had to do
The Marriott Hotel.
the Marriott Hotel. Yes, well, the Marriott Hotel is already built and it is functioning. It seems that because of the reconfiguration of the management, there has been some profits being made by it. I don't know all the facts about it, but from the last time I heard about it is that it is indeed doing good business, especially in the context of oil being found in Guyana. And I understand that there is a lot of customers there and it is somehow making a profit. And what was your first one again?
Why is Mr. Greenwich acting as Prime Minister when it's...
Well, we answered that question before.
We answered that question before. We're going to wait until the CCJ. I mean, you were there, Leland. You heard me address that. And when the finality is made by the CCJ, well, fine, we will then abide by that.
Mr. Ram?
Let me say this, and Mr. Ramjattan will probably welcome this. I don't think ministers are overpaid. But my problem was what made their case for a 50% increase in salaries when the teachers and the nurses and police, which he supervised, were only getting 2 and 3 and 4% salary increases. That's the issue, the indecency and the immorality of it. We are a low-wage economy. And let's face it, they said, the government said, well, Harman said he has no apology to make. They said they were doing it so that we don't have corruption. Well, you have as much, or you have corruption increasing in scale with this administration that it will at some point begin to make the serious accusations and incidents of corruption by the PPP pale into insignificance. I think we got to be careful about that.
Yes.
He mentioned Marriott. The fact is, there has been no reconfiguration of Marriott. I don't know where Mr. Ramjattan is getting facts from. He said, I just don't know all. It's just that I happen to read. There's no reconfiguration.
It's NISIL. You have a brand new NISIL set of members. They're the ones that deal with this thing now?
Yeah, but the financial model has not changed, Mr. Ram.
Well, I am saying you have a bigger customer set up because of the oil sector.
That's not a reconfiguration. No, Mr. Ramjattan does not understand what is the difference between a holding company and a company. NISIL has nothing to do with it. NISIL has remained in place. So Mr. Ramjattan is a confused young man. He's confused because of where he is. And I pity him. I really do pity him.
Mr. Ram, we all are imploring that we don't get personal. Let's stay with the issue.
No, he could get on with me that. I got broad shoulders, you know.
I want to ask Mr. Ram to give us his final words. We were out of time. Mr. Ram, the show is coming to an end now. Please give us your final thoughts.
At this point, the government has sent all the signals of being willing to be unconstitutional and placing Guyana into a situation of grave and unprecedented danger, a danger that could include Mr. Ramjattan himself not getting salaries, ministers not being paid, but the country becoming a pariah. It doesn't only matter the legal situation, it's where we stand. And so we as citizens, whether we support the coalition in 2015 or not, whether we support them now or not, have as much of a stake in the success of Guyana as it sits on the threshold and on the cusp of the transformation into a petro economy. Let us do the right thing. Let us start by honoring the Constitution, not only in the letter, but in the spirit. That's what democracy is about. Democracy is about conventions and practices and behaviors, and the willingness to call the other side and say, I concede. We are facing grave dangers. We still have a chance to retrieve ourselves from the going over the abyss. Mr. Ramjattan is a vice president. I think he's the leader of his party, and therefore he has a big say in what happens in our country now and into the future. I hope that he will demonstrate the kind of leadership which he once did, the kind of courage which he once demonstrated. And not only single-handedly, I'm not asking him to be a solo hero, but to start taking decisions, not for the AFC, not for the APNU AFC, but for the government and the people of the country. That's all I ask.
Mr. Ramjattan, final words.
The coalition government of APNU AFC and, of course, the Alliance for Change individually will take all the decisions that are going to accord with the Constitution of Guyana. The Constitution, as we all know, gives us the right to go to court for certain constitutional interpretation of a very important document, the Constitution. That is exactly what we are doing. The Constitution also has other organs of government, other constitutional bodies that have a big say in registration and elections matters, and those bodies must be allowed to perform their functions. We must not feel that because they have made a certain decision, that that decision is rife with inertia or bias or whatever it is. We must learn to respect the institutions that we have in Guyana. And when the institutions come out with decisions, fine, if there is an appellate body that we can go, or we can go to court for that decision being wrong, people must be allowed to do that. So if GECO is wrong, well, we can have a SACE going to court to ensure that we have the rectification through the court system. We must always have law and order in this country. And we have a coalition government with a president and the ministers of this government who are going to ensure that happens to the hilt. Nobody can ever go around telling us that we are violating the Constitution to the extent whereby I notice, especially from the diaspora and its opposition antagonistic elements there, saying that we are doing that. We are not doing that. And in any event, we must await certain procedures and processes. We must await the GCOM, we must await the court system. That is all I ask. And if it could happen within the 90 days, all the better. All the better. If the Court of Appeal can hear this matter within another 7 or 8 days' time, give its decision as like Justice Fox and George, we then can move on and can hear it within the 90 days period at the CCJ. They can hear matters, as Chris knows, very quickly. And then we take it from there. So I am urging people, do not chastise this government for unjustifiable criticisms. We are doing its best in the context of a situation that developed on the 21st of December, simply because as I said before, and I wouldn't repeat it, of a one man doing a certain thing that would cause a lot of us to be stunned by what he did, and that has caused this. But realize now that we're going to have a handle on this situation and ensure that Guyana do what is right, ensure that the people of Guyana live.
Thank you both. On that note, this is Sesna Wright Singh. I want to close with two thoughts. One, Mr. Ramjattan said, we must have law and order. And Mr. Christopher Ram said, we must do the right thing. I want to again wish all Guyanese and the two guests a happy 49th Republic anniversary to the Cooperative Republic of Guyana and its citizens. Thanks to Globespan 24/7 and Mr. Nohar Singh for providing this platform. Guyana is grateful for this conversation. I am grateful for this conversation. I leave this conversation more informed than I came to it. So on that note, have a great day. Peace out.
Before we close off, I would just like to announce the results of the poll that we have been running throughout the program. One question that we asked our online audience was, after March 21st, should the government resign and allow the Chief Justice to run the country while we wait for elections? 74% of people said yes, 26% said no. The second question was, should the government case to appeal the no confidence vote be allowed time to go to the CCJ? 22% of people said yes, 78% said no. And the third question was, should the government go to election with the current voters list? 92% said yes, and 8% said no.
Well, having said that, I just want to take the opportunity today to read out a letter that the United States government sent to the people of Guyana. The following letter is released by the U.S. Embassy and sent to the President, David Granger, on behalf of the people of the United States. Dear Mr. President, congratulations to you and the people of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana on the occasion of your 49th Republic Day, February 23rd. As your government and the people of Guyana assess the future direction of your country, know that the United States recognizes and honors Guyana's respect for the principles and integrity of democratic governance and institutions. Guyana is one of the United States' most important partners in ensuring the Americas remain a zone of democracy, freedom, and security. We look forward to continued collaborative partnership going forward, supporting the security and economic interests of both nations. On behalf of the American people, I wish you and your people a joyous, peaceful, and prosperous Republic Day. Sincerely, Donald Trump, President of the United States. Well, folks, we have that, and from this conversation, it seems as though we may have to have part 2 next week, because there are many unanswered questions. And I must say thank you again for being part of our audience, plus the 500 plus that was tracking us on Facebook. Thank you again.
Thank you very much.